Petr Yan will outclass Marcus McGee.
Pelter! No mercy! Yan! This guy is not done. He's as special a champion as we've had in a really long time.
He still is one of the elite in this unbelievably talent-stacked divisions.
What was your reaction when you got Marcus McGee? Were you surprised that it was someone a lot lower ranked?
I was offered a 5-round fight against Umar Nurmagomedov in Baku in Azerbaijan. I accepted the fight right away, but for their own reason, his team didn't accept the fight. I knew I wanted to fight as soon as possible, and the next possible opportunity was to fight in Abu Dhabi.
Marcus, the Maniac McGee!
Big opportunity here with Petr Yan. How surprised were you when the UFC came to you with a name like that?
Yeah, how can you not be surprised? You know, honestly, anything can happen in this game, so there's not too many times you are surprised. But, you know, when you're number 13, even when you're winning like I am, it was definitely surprising, but, you know, I was super stoked for the opportunity.
Yan vs McGee are set for the co-main event of UFC Abu Dhabi. And although Marcus McGee is on a pretty nice win streak, at the end of the day, Petr Yan is just better everywhere in my opinion, and I think he's not only going to beat McGee, but I think he's going to dominate him as well. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm JuicyMMA. I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. And if you're enjoying this content and want to support the channel, hit that join button below. You'll get exclusive access to members only live streams, members only videos, as well as other perks as well. But anyways, let's get into it. When the UFC originally put this fight together, I thought it was very confusing. On one hand, you have Petr Yan, who's a legitimate top 3 guy at the bantamweight division, a guy who's probably going to get the next title shot after Corey Sandhagen, and on the other hand, you have a guy in Marcus McGee. And although Marcus is undefeated in the UFC, and although he is on a pretty nice win streak, at the end of the day, he's a number 13th ranked guy, and his best win was against Jonathan Martinez, and that fight was extremely close. So matching up a number 13th ranked guy against a number 3 ranked guy in Petr Yan just didn't make all that much sense to me. Now, obviously, we did see a similar thing happen not too long ago, where Joshua Van was pretty low in the rankings and he got a fight against the number 1 contender at the time in Brendan Royval. And we even saw Sean O'Malley get a shot against the number 1 contender in Petr Yan when Sean O'Malley was much lower in the rankings. So of course it has happened before. But for both Sean O'Malley and Joshua Van, it made some sort of sense. For Van, they were looking to push a young up-and-coming star and a guy who was proving to be very active and very good, and for Sean O'Malley, he was perceived to be a star at that time, so matching him up against the number 1 contender, seeing if he can beat Petr Yan and potentially giving him a title shot made some sort of sense. But for Marcus McGee at this point, I don't really think it makes much sense. Although Marcus is undefeated in the UFC, and although he is on a pretty long win streak, the caliber of wins that he's shown thus far haven't been all that high, and I don't think there's all too much hype and excitement around the Marcus McGee's name. So I started to think, why did the UFC put this fight together? And at this point, I still don't have a clear reason for why they would decide to do this, but the only reason why I could possibly see the UFC putting this fight together is because Petr Yan wanted to be active. At this point, it's pretty clear that Corey Sandhagen is getting the next title shot versus Merab Dvalishvili. And for Petr Yan, it seems like, at least to me, that he's going to get the shot after that, but waiting to fight Merab or Corey after this next upcoming fight, it's just going to be a lot of time off. So I think for Petr Yan, he wanted to stay active and he wanted to fight somebody, and the UFC was probably looking throughout the rankings trying to put a matchup together for Petr, but unfortunately everybody else throughout the rankings was either booked against somebody else or maybe they declined to fight against Petr Yan, and I think the UFC decided on Marcus McGee. That's really the only rationale I can see for why the UFC made this fight. Now obviously, if Marcus McGee were to theoretically win this fight, it would add fresh blood to the 135-pound division, and there would be some benefits with that, some more matchmaking the UFC can put together, but at this point I think the main reason for why this fight was made was just to keep Petr Yan busy. But a question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, why do I think Petr Yan is going to outclass Marcus McGee? Well, in my opinion, this comes down to a couple different factors, but the first factor I want to touch upon is his striking. And I think Yan has an advantage on the striking in 2 different areas. The first area, and the most obvious area, is the boxing. When you talk about Petr Yan, he's certainly one of the best boxers in the UFC. UFC. He does a great job at pressuring his opponents, getting on that inside boxing range. He does a great job at putting combinations together to the body, to the head. He's very creative with the combos he's able to put together, and he even has a good amount of power for the 135-pound division. And I think if he is able to pressure Marcus McGee and he is able to force him in that interior boxing range, Yan can have a lot of success. But outside of just his boxing, over the years, Yan has done a phenomenal job at incorporating kicks into his striking game as well. So not only does he do a great job at fighting on that interior boxing range, but now he also does a great job at utilizing kicks and fighting at range as well. And we saw Marcus McGee in his last fight struggle a lot with leg kicks, as early on in the first round and throughout the fight, Jonathan Martinez was able to leg kick a ton and land a ton of leg kicks on Marcus McGee, and it really caused a lot of damage throughout the fight. And although for Petr Yan he's not known to be nearly as good of a leg kicker as a guy like Jonathan Martinez is, at the end of the day I do think Petr Yan can look to incorporate some leg kicks early on, especially to start to wear out Marcus McGee, to start to tear up the legs a little bit, and then at that point he can go into that interior boxing range, put combinations together, start to pick apart Marcus McGee, and potentially even find a finish. So overall, in terms of the striking, I think regardless of where the fight is held, whether it's in close or whether it's at range, I think Petr Yan has an advantage over Marcus McGee. But the next reason for why I think Petr Yan is going to outclass Marcus McGee is due to the wrestling. Because obviously when you talk about Petr Yan, the wrestling is not the first thing that comes to mind. Of course, it's the striking. But when you talk about some of his fights over the years, Yan has shown a really good ability to wrestle. He was able to beat Xiang Yadong not too long ago based on his wrestling ability. And I think in this fight versus McGee, if Yan wanted to, he'll be able to utilize his wrestling, he'll be able to get takedowns, control McGee on the ground, and potentially even land some nice ground and pound shots. And another way that we may see Yan look to wrestle in this fight is if he gets caught. Now I don't think it's super likely, but Marcus McGee does have a good amount of power. So if for whatever reason Marcus lands a big shot and hurts Petr Yan, I could see Yan certainly going for takedowns and being successful with them. So overall, I think Petr Yan is essentially better than Marcus McGee in all aspects of the game, in terms of his striking ability as well as his wrestling ability. But a question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, what are my official predictions for this matchup? Well, in my opinion, I think this is going to be a domination one way or the other. Whether Yan gets a decision victory or whether Yan gets a finish, I think it's going to be a very dominating performance either way. But for my official prediction for this matchup, I would certainly lean with Petr Yan via a third round TKO. I think early on in round 1 as well as round 2, Yan is going to start to pick apart McGee, and once we get to the third round, the damage is going to be too much and Yan will eventually be able to find a finish. Now, as I sort of touched upon before, McGee is pretty powerful. He does hit really hard for the bantamweight division, and Petr Yan is going to need to look to avoid some of the shots. But for the most part, I think Yan is going to be okay. He's pretty defensively sound. He does a great job at utilizing that high guard. He doesn't take too many shots to the head, alongside with the fact that Yan also has a pretty good chin. So I think for the most part, Yan is going to be able to dominate, while at the same time avoiding some of those big shots coming back his way from Marcus McGee. But assuming Yan is able to win this matchup, I think he's going to be next in line for a title. Now, obviously, only time will tell what does end up happening in that fight between Merab and Corey, but I'm fully expecting Merab to win again, and we will probably be seeing Petr Yan versus Merab Dvalishvili too. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Petr Yan is going to outclass Marcus McGee, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out, guys.